am exceedingly weary, so I don't know how this is all going to come out. Yeah, a short one. No, it could be a long one. I was up until 2 in the morning working on handouts for you guys. So they're dogs. At least if I do it at 2 in the morning, and I've got a built-in excuse. All right, what we're doing is we're working with pre-reading, where we actually get into the nitty-gritty of the character. We're looking at the most general influences and the most general characteristics of a horoscope and the basic outlay of the character. Now, this is important because you may not be able to predict specific behavior with what we're doing, but you can get an awful lot out of the general idea, the general atmosphere of the character. And when you start mixing what we're doing with the specifics, then everything begins to make more sense. For example, if you have a chart and that chart has Saturn square Mercury, and that often indicates a tendency to lie, and pretty pronounced. But if there are a lot of planets in cardinal signs, for example, that tendency might be acute. However, if you have a lot of planets in fixed signs, it's likely to be a lifelong kind of lying behavior. So with the cardinal signs, it may come and go. And so if you just look at the Saturn square Mercury, which does give you specifics, it's not the same thing as looking at the Saturn square Mercury in the general background of the entire character. So the things that we're doing now, we want to be keeping in mind. And from them, we're going to get a feel for the whole character and the big shape. The method that we're using to do this is the method of tests and profiles. Everybody has a profile index. And what we're going to do is we're going to do many, many tests of different kinds, and we're going to get a profile from each. And after we get past the first one, this time around, we're going to start doing cross-profiling right from the beginning. And so then we'll be putting this information together and integrating it and understanding more about the character. And the cross-profiling will become more and more and more as we go along. We're proceeding under the assumption that absolutely everything in a horoscope is important. Everything. But if we're going to practice much astrology and have a really good understanding of what somebody is like, we have to understand the relative significance of different factors. What things are relatively more important and what things are not so important. So throughout the class, especially in the second and third parts, we're going to be doing more and more and more to determine what's more important. When it comes down to the nitty-gritty of things, there are classic cases. Alan Leo, the British astrologer, had one of those classic cases. I have the horoscope if you want to see it. It's of a man who 3 times in his life was subject to accidents, and they could have been fatal. And I believe on 2 instances, the car wheel stopped that far from the man's head. It was like an inch or 2. And Alan Leo says, well, he had one tendency to accidents, but he had another tendency that was slightly more significant, that was protective, so that even though he had the accidents, he wasn't going to die from them. And that's the kind of thing that we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to relative significance. All right. Last time we began discussing the first test in the profile index, which is the Gestalt test. And we had a big introduction into Gestaltism, which we said was the study of patterns, meaningful patterns. Even though this is listed among the attitude tests, it's not really an attitude test, but it's the broadest of the broad. And so I put it up in there rather than down with the more important tests at the bottom of the sheet. It's hard to fit a Gestalt in anyway. We have also said last time that not all charts have Gestalts in them. In fact, it's reasonably safe to say that most charts do not have Gestalts in them. Very few people study feng shui, or very few people are architects and make the most out of a philosophy of relating to space. Now, everybody does relate to space in their own way. Some people fill it up with knickknacks, and some people they have heaps of clothing here or there, and some people are general accumulators, and so everyone has their own outlook about what they do with and in space. But to have a really distinct philosophy is not something that happens often. We'll discuss a little bit in just a few minutes of the infrequency of the appearance of Gestalts, because they're not something that happens. You know, it's not always that there are special patterns that are in the air. Yes, and we're going to do a lot of that tonight, and we'll be recovering a lot of the things we said last time. Only the review won't be anything like the original. That's one of my chief laws. You never say the same thing twice the same way. I would be a very bad person to have on a witness stand. Each time I'd give a different point of view about it. I don't know. I'm hoping to put together the grand astrological probability chart, which doesn't exist. I'm going to get a new computer fairly soon, within a month or two. I've been saying that for 2 years now. For 2 years, but I'm going to get a wampum stompum computer, and I'm going to run things on it months on end, and I want to find out the probabilities of various things happening. And one of the things that I want to find out is how probable is it to have one of the Gestalts with a certain degree of definition and a certain degree of texture and all of that. And maybe someday I'll be able to tell you how often each of these occurs. With a Gestalt, we're trying to determine if a native who owns a chart has a recognizable approach or a recognizable philosophy of relating to space. How does one occupy space or not occupy it? One of the sub-questions we ask is that if a person does exhibit a patterned approach to space, how well defined is it? Is it really a clear-cut thing? Definition means how sharp and recognizable as opposed to being vague or ambiguous. Another question we ask is, what was the texture of a pattern occupying space? That is it reasonably constant throughout? It's the same thing as looking at fabric in textiles. If you have rough wool, it's got knobs in it. But if you have something like really fine silk, it'll hold water. And it'll hold a lot of temperature as well. So that is the texture. How evenly spaced are things within a pattern? The uniformity. In the last meeting, we discussed the two extreme gestalts, the splash in the bundle. We said that the splash was the attempt to evenly occupy all of space. That is to take your planets and to spread them evenly throughout space. With the splash, there is no definition because there's no beginning, there's no end. The pattern is just like dropping a stone in the water and it splashes in every direction. So there isn't really a definition there. However, with the splash, texture is all important. Now, since there are 360 degrees in the circle, and there are 10 planets, that means the optimal splash would be when the planets are evenly spaced 36 degrees apart. Now, we live on Earth, and because we live on Earth, we have to look at the heavens relative to where we are, not to some other place. And so we use geocentric astrology. And in geocentric astrology, the inner planets, Mercury and Venus, are always going to appear to be closer to the Sun. And so finding both planets 36 degrees away from the Sun, one on either side of the Sun, that's a really rare event. And so then having a perfect splash, having those two planets each 36 degrees from the Sun, and then having all of the others 36 degrees apart, that's not something that happens very, very frequently at all. That takes a long time. So you might say that living on Earth, there's going to be a bias against the splash. And that we're sort of going against the grain if we try to occupy space sort of like the way we broadcast seeds, or if we're distributing things in space. So the splash is probably the least common pattern, especially to find it with a very good description. Most of the things that you see that they're going to think are splashes are really going to be nondescript charts. That is, charts where the texture is not good. The bundle is the other extreme. The bundle is when you try to pack all of the planets into a small area of space as possible. And then that little bundle of planets, that bunch, defines all of space. Physicists or astrophysicists would say that space gets warped or it gets biased where there is a dense concentration of matter. And that's sort of the principle of the bundle. If I concentrate my energy here, all of space has to bend in order to accommodate to me. In the bundle, definition is all important, and texture is not so important. In fact, the definition of a bundle is a really tight definition. We said last time that for it to be really a bundle, all of the planets would have to be within 60 degrees. And the tighter, the better. From our geocentric perspective, with Mercury and Venus always being close to the Sun, we can say that we are biased toward bundle experiences. So the whole idea of concentration or specialization or having a warped point of view because of focusing on one thing too much is likely to our Earth our Earth experience. Boy, I'm really tired. The closer one gets to the Sun, the more likely one is to find splashes. In fact, from the sun itself is the only place that you're really likely to find splashes all of the time. So like if you have that cosmic consciousness and you're identified in the sun rather than on Earth, then you have the star-like consciousness and everything rotates around the spiritual center of being, and we're stellar citizens, and we have that broad, balanced outlook. But here on Earth, in fact, the further you get out from the sun, the more inclination there is toward bunching or toward bundling. So that if you got out at Pluto, you could need the sun that would look as small as a lot of our stars do, and certainly all of the planets that were inside would look very much bundled up. So this indicates that the further out the planet is, the more likely it is to specialization, or the consciousness is more likely to see things in a specialized way. And there's a pseudo-implication of this throughout astrology. Throughout astrology, the further a planet gets away from the sun, the more it has its own nature. For example, the moon has its own nature only at the full moon. All the rest of the time, it's some kind of expression of the sun. It's always pointing its horns toward the sun. Outer planets, the further they are away from the sun, the more they are seen to be so individual that they're retrograde, which represents some kind of renegade state of consciousness, going against the grain or going backwards. So there is something about that principle that the more you are close to the center of things, the more things go faster, and the more things are spread out in terms of angular momentum. All right. Now, there are other ways that we could look at these two extremes relating to space. The bundle, for example, could be seen as a peanut. And if you look at the bundle as a peanut, then the splash is like Skippy Smooth. It's like that's what it is. It's the peanut distributed with texture evenly everywhere. Now that's not a facetious way to look at it, because there are people that would rather chew peanuts than eat peanut butter. And there are people that would rather have chunky style than to have smooth style, because they want a little something to bite on. As far as I'm concerned, it's anathema to have anything to do with the peanut. The peanut is the instrument of the devil. Any plant that has to put its fruit underground and hide it, there's got to be something wrong with that plant. Yeah, it's a little. You know how the peanuts grow, don't you? They put up a plant, and they're goobers. They're a legume, and then they drop this little umbilical cord down, and the peanut grows under the ground. That's an unwholesome fruit that hides itself from the sun. That just can't be. Yeah, I would believe anything monstrous about the peanut. The only thing that is ever good that happened to the peanut is Jimmy Carter. All right. But these are just the kind of idiosyncrasies we're looking for. It would be interesting to look at the charts of people and to see what kind of textures of fabrics they liked, like whether they liked Oxford cloth things. Oh, I had one at one time. I had a sweater from, it was llama wool, primitive llama wool from Ecuador, and it was dyed by the Indians, and it was a rough, rugged-looking sweater. And I had this girlfriend. She said, I want to wash that sweater for you. And I wouldn't let her, and I wouldn't let her, and I wouldn't let her. And I said, you can't treat this sweater this way. You've got to dry clean. And she said, I've been washing sweaters. I've had 5 children, and I've been washing sweaters all my life. And so finally I made the mistake and gave it to her. 2 years later, we had broken up by then. 2 years later, one of her girlfriends had to tell me, well, your sweater is no more. It ended up one little tiny bundle. It was, it was untreated llama wool, so it just shrunk. All right. We're going to look a little at some of these ideas again in a few minutes. Basically, there are two families and hybrids of those two families when you're dealing with gestalts. There are area gestalts and there are definition gestalts. The epitome of the area gestalt is the splash. And the epitome of the definition gestalt is the bundle. And so we're going to look at all of the variations. We're going to look at a few variations because we don't want to spend too much time on this, because this is a good idea for getting for looking at philosophies of things, but it isn't always so astrologically prevalent. All right. Yes. Yeah. All of the planets evenly spread out throughout the heavens. Not very often. Yeah, but that was something else. We're going to see what that was later on tonight. All right. Under area gestalts, the next kind of a recognizable gestalt that has astrological importance is called the bull. The bull is when all of the planets are spread out through half of the heavens. That is through 180 degrees and plus or minus 10 degrees, you can say, maybe 15, I don't know. The idea behind the bull is if one occupies half of space, one in effect has all of space by reflection. Now this we know to be true just from experience in working with horoscopes. For example, where Saturn is in the horoscope is where a person is most likely to be selfish. And selfishness is our bane as human beings. And Saturn also represents destiny accumulated over time. So the position of Saturn indicates where one is likely to be ill. So that if you have Saturn in Aries, it's very likely that you're likely to head colds or head illnesses. But after you study astrology for a while, you find that Saturn in Aries is just as likely to mean blockages in the kidneys, in that there is the opposite effect. Things always reflect across the zodiac. In fact, this whole principle really works in amazing ways in health. Now, for example, if you think about something really obvious like ulcers, you would think that ulcers would be caused by afflictions from cancer. It turns out that ulcers are more commonly found with afflictions from Capricorn, because cancer does fret, but it doesn't worry the way Capricorn does. And so that the worrying of Capricorn has a ricochet effect to the opposite sign in Cancer. It works the other way around because Capricorn represents the skeleton, where everything is brought down to a calcareous state. And so you would expect that something like arthritis would be much affected by planets in Capricorn. It turns out that it has a lot to do with cancer, with conditions in the stomach. I think it has something to do either with digestive juices or acids or something in the stomach that produce a chemistry and a condition that makes arthritis more likely. Because there are a good number of cases where people had crippling arthritis, and then they had half their stomach cut away, and the arthritis just quit right then and there. So there is that opposite side effect. Another example is zodiacal light. Almost in no place in the United States can you see it, except maybe down in the Arizona, New Mexico deserts. But at midnight, if you look at the zodiac, you can see like a little halo of light at the spot that's exactly opposite of where the sun is. So that there is a reflective, there's like a second sun that is called the zodiacal light sun. It's very, very faint. Any place where there is a focus like a planet, there is an accentuation. And where there is an accentuation shows where you're putting your energy. It's a concentration. Planets are focal points, and focal points are concentrations. But wherever there's a planet, it begets, one extreme begets another, so that there is a reactive effect on the other side. So if all of the planets have this, and you have all of the planets distributed over half the chart, then in effect you can have control of all of space. But it's a certain kind of consciousness that thinks in terms of a bowl. It is a philosophy of reflection. It looks at the thing and reflects on what is not the thing. It is also a consciousness that likes symmetry. Symmetry either across an axis or across the fulcral center. So this is like a concave or a convex mirror. But in those kinds of devices, there's always distortion. So this is like trying to see heaven in earth and like trying to see earth in heaven. The concrete defines the universal, universal defines the concrete. When you have a bowl, it's a little bit much, isn't it? We'll just enlarge this half of the circle. When you have a bowl, basically what you have is a semicircle. And the semicircle has always been the symbol of soul. The circle is the symbol of spirit. The straight line or cross is the symbol of matter. And what is halfway between spirit and matter is soul. So what we're seeing here is sort of like not only a reflective consciousness, but an inwardly reflective consciousness that incubates. And so there is, in this relationship to space, there's an incubation kind of consciousness. There are various devices that we can see that utilize this principle. One is the sickle. You only need a semicircle to get an optimum of blade. Another way is if you look at the bowl as a bowl. It is receptive. It is containing. It is conserving. It deals with capacity. All of those are bowl kinds of consciousness. Or you can tip the bowl over, and it becomes a shield or a cover, and then it represents protectivity or even efficiency, because arches and domes depend on the bowl. It's a great way to build a very stable cover for something that with little material. My favorite application of the bowl is a rocking chair. Or did you ever see those things that children have that you inflate and they're round on the bottom and they've got ballast on the bottom? You know, you punch at them and they go down and then they bounce back up again. That's based on the bowl principle. So in the half, like with the rocker, in the semicircle, you have stability and you have rhythm. It's sort of an arced kind of oscillation. But you never get anywhere. That's the whole quality of looking at life with a bowl kind of consciousness. If you're protecting, you can't get anywhere. You know, it's that kind of thing. Or if you're rocking back and forth, you never get anywhere. You don't get anywhere with the bowl if you look at it astrologically. Suppose you have all the planets in a bowl and something comes along, something that moves pretty fast, the moon. It's going through the zodiac and it's conjoining one planet after another. And just after all of the planets have been activated to do something, things have been concretized, then it gets to the point where for half of the cycle, it is opposing. So there is a modular quality that either you're condensing or you're being upset. So half the cycle has conjunctions, the other half of the cycle has oppositions. And that's another one of those things for not getting things done. Now, there are actually two ways you can look at the bowl in terms of space. One way is you can call it a squashed splash, or you can call it a stretched bundle. Since it applies to both the definition and the texture are important. The texture is important because, suppose, for example, this is a mirror, and there are gaps where the silvering isn't there. If there are gaps where the silvering isn't there, you're going to miss things. There are going to be holes in things. If there are lumps in a rocker, you know, I've been on that kind of rocker. If there are places where it's flattened out or where there's a lump on it or the rocker cracked and somebody fixed it with tape, it doesn't make for a smooth ride. If you have planets bundled up, the whole principle of the rocker, that peaceful rocking back and forth kind of motion, is lost. You know, the stability is lost. The definition is important because if it is much under 180 degrees, some things will not be reflected. There will be gaps, and it will be like gaps that you can't see things. What is it called? retinal pigmentosis, where you can't see things out of the corner of your eye. It's called tunnel vision. You can only see the things that are straight ahead. And so like a less than 180 degree bowl, it's significantly less. It really isn't a bowl because too much is left out because there isn't a reflection. If it is more than 180 degrees, then the planets by opposition begin to cancel each other out. Because there are two areas then that have oppositions at the same time as there are conjunctions. So the definition, if you can get an exact 180 degree, that would be really nice. Now, the bowl brings out another characteristic of gestalts, and that is edges. The first planet in the bowl is called the leading edge, and the last planet in the bowl is called the trailing edge. And the leading edge is the part that is the first planet that, after the space, that anything transiting will hit that planet first. That's the leading. And this would be the trailing edge. Some people like to throw the first punch, and some people like to have the last word. And the whole idea with edges is how you initiate things and how you finish things. Planets that are in opposition at the two edges of the bowl become very important because that's the attitude that holds together everything that is being reflected. It represents the kind of polarity or the kind of extremism that is being is holding everything in place. I won't say it any other way. Edges do not apply to the splash because there is no beginning and there is no end. Everything, you can start anywhere. It's like the whole circle. Edges do apply to bundles, and they work similarly with regard to start and finish, but they don't seem to be as significant as they are in a bowl. Obviously, they become more significant if the leading and trailing edge of a bundle form a sextile with each other. Then everything is contained within one aspect. You can see all the stages of that aspect as it develops. Bowls can be oriented relative to signs or to houses in significant ways. Obviously, if you have a bowl that is sitting in the standard position, like a soup bowl sitting on your table, it is in the northern hemisphere. And that means a receptive consciousness into your personal life. It's a concentration on the personal life, and the macrocosmic life, the life of society, is seen only by reflection relative to the personal sphere of opportunities. However, if the bowl is in winter signs, and the winter signs tend to have more of an interning spiritual quality, and at the same time it is in the northern hemisphere, then that is a double significance, and each significance means something different. The placement to the houses represents what kind of houses are accentuated or what kinds of opportunities in life, and relative to the signs, it represents kinds of attitudes that are accentuated. We're going to come back to this again and again, so don't worry. We're just introducing it now because this is an example of cross-profiling. You're seeing how the bowl relates to the signs, or you're seeing how the bowl relates to the houses, and you're getting some general ideas, and you're putting things together, and more and more things begin to make sense. From Libra to Aries, the signs in which the sun is in when it's winter. Some positive qualities of the bull: protection, nurture, stability, reflection, receptivity, conservation, contrast, and comprehensive work. It never gets anywhere, but what it does very comprehensively. Some potential difficulties of the bull are non-progressiveness. It's like marching in place or treading water. The bull is also one-sided. It tends to inversion or other forms of distortion, immobility of attitude, some tendency to be paradoxical, some tendency to be subjective in the receptivity, sometimes melodramatic, sometimes exaggerated. So it's good for the kind of person who wants to work things over and over and over and over without necessarily accomplishing something. Very thorough, but it doesn't want immediate progress. It's difficult for somebody who vacillates. I don't know if you've ever seen that kind of person that worries. They stand there and they rock back and forth in places. You see those kinds of people in mental institutions. They stand there and they rock back and forth. Sometimes they sit in a chair and they rock back and forth like that. And they keep going over the same things again and again. All right. Yes. Yes. No, it isn't the same that way. No. Usually the people who rock back and forth, front to back, are usually in more trouble. All right, there are two types. We're coming. You're way ahead. All right. The next one. We're starting now to get into vagaries. The whole idea is now, with the locomotive or with the majority, strictly defined, the locomotive is when 2/3 of the space is occupied, and a majority, some people have another name for it, is when 3/4 of the space is occupied. We're getting into really vague things here that don't really look like patterns anymore. If there is good definition and if there is good texture, they sometimes do have meanings. But it's, like you can strain at a gnat and you can read all kinds of things into things like this, and I don't think it is important to do so. Any time that the open space or the unoccupied space is less than 90 degrees, what you really have is a nondescript chart. It doesn't have any particular gestalt about it at all. And that's all right. Most of us don't have a real distinct idea about space. Now, this is one of those things, all of the area gestalts have something of paradox about them. And the locomotive or the majority, or even the bowl for that matter, can be looked at in two ways. On one hand, you can say that all right, that's a locomotive. Everything's in 2/3 of the chart. The most common way of looking at it is where the planets are, whether by sign or by house, represents where the person is focally active. Things are in control. You're occupying this territory, it's yours. Sort of like you're playing Go or something like that. The unoccupied territory is the thing that you don't know. And what you don't know, what you're doing, the reason this gets the name of locomotive is the idea that you start with the leading edge, and then you build up momentum going through all of these things, and then you go into no man's land. And when you go into no man's land, the momentum that you have from the locomotive of being, it's like when they send out probes to distant planets. They do it when the planets are in such an alignment because they'll use the gravity of one planet to swing go out to the next one, and then they'll use its gravity to swing it out to the next one, and so they use the gravitational field of each of the planets for leverages to sling it until finally it gets way out into outer space somewhere. Whereas if you just tried to shoot straight out there, you couldn't do it without using. And that's the philosophy of the locomotive. It's taking as much area as you feel comfortable with and with which you have talents, and using it to capture the space that you don't know. But it's perfectly possible to have a paradoxical view about it. And that is to look at it just the other way around. And this is why interpreting a horoscope is not an easy thing. That's why you have to interact with a person to find out the way it's working. Because another way you can look at it, you can say the empty part, the person didn't focus in that part of space because they know that already. That's in the bag. Why should I redo something that I already know? So I can just let that be, and I can put all of my emphasis on these things. The way the events occur is very much the same, but the intended purpose is paradoxically opposite. All right, I don't know if we have much more to say about that. Texture is very important in this. If there isn't a good texture, there is not a locomotive, or there is not a majority. Majority is the name for when all of the planets are in 3/4. Yeah, no. This majority is in 2/3. Majority is 3/4. All right. There is always a temptation to say that when most of the aspects in the occupied territory are benefic, then you're using the things that you know to do what you don't know. On the other hand, if most of the aspects in the occupied territory are malefics, then you're saying what's in the bag, you're letting in the bag, and you're going to take on these hard problems. That's one rule of thumb that you can roughly use to see which of the paradoxical opposite interpretations you want to utilize. I don't like rules of thumb, but sometimes it'll work out. All right. Let's look at the next type, which I think is actually less vague than what we've looked at now, and it's called the butterfly. Now, a few minutes ago, we said that area gestalts are a way of trying to occupy as much of space with as few people as possible. Julius Caesar was an area gestaltist. Because if you read Caesar's Gallic Wars, he prided himself in being able to surround cities with the least number of people possible. And usually it is the bigger army that surrounds the littler. And even when Caesar found himself with the smaller army, he tried to surround. And so like with the area gestalt is you're trying to occupy. It's an occupation thing. Now, everything we've looked at so far, the slash, the bull, the locomotive, in them the area of occupation was contiguous. It doesn't have to be that way. The area doesn't have to be contiguous, but if you don't have contiguous areas, you get into nondescript things very quickly. So the only of the non-contiguous area gestalts that I would ever consider would be the butterfly. And the butterfly is when all of the planets are in two areas of space. And those two areas are about of equal size, equal definition, and equal texture. And there's like an axis of symmetry between them. So like you have butterfly wings. Like almost all the gestalts, you find these very rarely. But this is a very good principle. In effect, this is like a bowl broken up. Take an example. Take it, suppose all of the planets were in the first and third quadrants. Those would be the butterfly wings. As much space would be occupied in this kind of butterfly as is occupied in a bowl. But it's occupied in a much different way. In the bowl, the opposition is used merely as a reflection. In the butterfly, there's a total fulfillment. The first quadrant is the personal needs quadrant. Right in the heart of that is personal needs, the second house. The third quadrant is the shared needs quadrant. So the expressive quadrants, personal expression and universal expression, are just not looked at all. But the relationship of personal needs and things relative to societal or universal needs is seen very well. It's like there's a great utile principle in this butterfly concept, because you're looking at both perspectives, from the individual to the universe and from the universe to the individual. And with that kind of thing, you're specializing in needs, and you can do something. And it's like a butterfly wing. Like with the bull, it's like the rocking chair. You go back and forth, or like a kid on a hobby horse. It goes back and forth and it never gets you anywhere except in its imagination. It's reflective, imaginative. But here, you're flapping your wings and you're getting somewhere, but you're getting somewhere only in two complementary attitudes or departments of life. Of course, the butterfly doesn't have to be so neat like this. It could be just one area here and one area here, which would not be so quite the symmetry across the center of the chart wouldn't be there, and would have to be symmetry across an axis. And if you wanted to analyze it in terms of the occupation space, you'd have to see where the axis between the two areas went to get an understanding of it. Again, we don't want to spend a whole lot of a whole lot of time on it because you're going to run into very few butterflies, but as long as you're familiar with the idea and have it running through your consciousness, you'll be able to recognize something like that when you see it in a chart. Unless you look, like I sometimes look at as many as 1,000 charts in a year, and unless you look at a lot of charts, you don't always see gestalts. Most of the time you don't see them. And they aren't always germane to a particular problem that somebody brings up. All right, now we're set to look at the next category here. We're looking at the definition, or the cluster gestalts. We said just a few minutes ago that the bundle was the ultimate cluster gestalt. Everything was packed into as tight of an area as the native could pack it. And that close definition is the all. The more tightly packed it is, the more dense it is, and the more it warps everything to that one point of view. Now, in the same way that the areas can be broken up, as we just saw with the butterfly, clusters can be broken up. But when clusters are broken up, they suffer more than when areas are broken up, because the whole idea of a cluster is that things are just neat and tidy in one place, and it becomes like your boat anchor for everything else to hang on to. But if it is broken up, the breakup has a few rules in order for it to really be a valid gestalt type. Usually, the tighter the bundles are that it's broken up into, the better. The fewer the clusters, the more significant the gestalt is. And usually, cluster breakups are more effective when they're associated with aspect patterns. We're not going to go into aspect patterns until way on in this course. A totally different way of looking at patterns. So the first type of definition where you have a broken bundle into two bundles is called a seesaw. That is, you have two bundles. This is the definition version of a butterfly. Butterfly has two wide areas like wings that it uses. The seesaw has two tight bundles, preferably in opposition to each other. The whole idea is that you have two nexes, two very powerful centers of control vying for attention. It's the case in the human body, and I don't mean the big and the little head in men. I mean the head and the heart. The heart has its own pacemaker. It can be sped up or slowed down by the head, but the heart has its own thing. So when you have two nexes of control, whether there is an opposition or not, there's always some struggle between them. This is why the benefit of the cluster being one tight little group that can penetrate through anything is very much lost in the opposition. We don't know when a person is dead. Is it when they're heart dead or is it when they're brain dead? It used to be that we considered death when the heart stopped beating. Now we've become so fascinated and we have so much love of the nervous system and the brain, we now define death as brain deadness. and so that we can get in there and harvest those organs once the brain is dead. You see what I'm trying to say? Yeah, but there's always that struggle. Without the heart, most of the blood, the highest concentration of blood for use is in the brain, because nervous tissue requires blood at all times, and it's the only place in the body that there are numbers of routes to get blood to the same area. There's a circular blood. What is it called? Is it called a harness or something? But in the brain, there's like a circular artery, and it's fed from different places, so that there's always blood there. So that if there's a blockage of a vessel, of an artery, the blood still gets there anyway, because the body's protecting the brain that it needs it that much. So but without the heart, the brain dies. But if the brain dies, the heart can still go on, But it's sort of like a divided consciousness. So the seesaw is like that. If there is an aspect or an opposition between the two little bundles, it indicates some kind of line of communication. It's something like a seesaw is something like a marriage. You can do things with a marriage that you couldn't do otherwise. The other person becomes your eyes to the world that you never would have by yourself alone. But because there's two of you, there's always some friction there, and there's always a struggle for who controls, especially with individuals like ourselves, high individuality people. With the seesaw, it is not an attempt to try to control all of space from two places. It's just trying to work on things from two places of operations. It does not try to conquer all of space. Can't do it. There's always tension, even if the two bundles are trying to each other. And the seesaw is always extremist. It's not like the bowl, where there's always some kind of moderation. In any kind of seesaw, the positives are dialectic functioning. Also, two views for internal correction, two fronts of attack. So it indicates a lot of options and alternatives. The negatives are that there are always tension or dissension. There's always division of energy, unrest, extremism, unsettledness. We'll look at these very, very briefly. The next two that we'll treat as one are the splay and the quadrate. Splay is an architectural term. It's where there are oblique meetings of lines or of walls or something like that. The splay, as defined astrologically, is three chunks or three bundles. And what is usually meant is that the three bundles are roughly trying to each other. So this is what would be a multi-planet grand trine. I've never seen a true splay. I have one friend that has 8 out of the 10 planets in a grand trine. It's not incisively strong like a grand trine, but it is 3 areas of concern. It gains its strength from having compact masses rather than from precision of an exact trine or something like that. It has the quality of triangulation. That is, you know when things are occurring and where things are occurring, which is what triangulation does. And it covers all sides of an issue. Not only is there synthesis, and not only is there a thesis and antithesis, there is synthesis. The quadrate, which I wouldn't even look for, is when all the planets are in 4 tight bundles. They'd have to be really tight bundles in order for definition to be there. I wouldn't even spend much time with it, even though if Carl Jung were sitting in here, he would be very angry at that, because Carl Jung almost worshipped the number 4. Everything was in 4. Huh? Yeah. Yes. The last of the definition gestalts isn't really a gestalt, but it's something that you find more frequently than you find a gestalt, and it does have meaning. Let's just call it chunk style. In chunk style, all of the planets are in tight little chunks with conjunctions. No planet is by itself alone. Those chunks might be an aspect with each other, they might not. You might even look at the quadrate and display as chunk style. Oh, I run into these all the time. Yes. This is a fairly common thing to find. The philosophy here is not trying to capture space and not trying to marshal everybody together to do one specific thing. Like, for example, the butterfly, you're trying to fly through a certain balanced activity. The chunk style is more like outposts in some vast wilderness. It's like there's a settlement here and then nothing in between. And within that settlement, there's a very nice little economy going on. There's each little settlement has a self-sufficiency. Chunk style is almost like Van Gogh's Starry Night. There are those great big blobs of light. The stars in his Starry Night are much bigger than what you see when you look out. And so this is chunk style consciousness is the kind of consciousness where a person might have an interest in pasta making and an interest in astronomy and in Renaissance music in Florence. You know, there's just certain little areas that are focused on, and there's a little area, and it seems like there's no connection between them. There's not a universalizing quality to it, but you see a lot of chunk-style charts where people will have this little thing, that little thing, that little thing. It's kind of a smorgasbord of specialties is what a chunk-style consciousness is like. I had a friend that was like that. She was great at training dogs for the blind and for studying certain Slavic languages and painting with watercolors. And everything else in between. She went to college a number of times but never succeeded because she would do well in certain special little areas, but what was necessary for general education wasn't there. Then she had children. When she had children, she then brought all of those specialties together, and it's sort of like they connected everything else. I've never looked at a chart in that regard. All right, we're ready to look at the last column, and that is hybrid, or focused gestalts. A hybrid is a combination of an area gestalt and one or two outside points. Sometimes it can even be a definition gestalt and one or two outside points. The hybrids are very powerful. Sometimes hybrid gestalts are symbolic gestalts because they look symbolically like things in the world, more so than anything we've looked at so far. The external point can be anywhere outside of the area or anywhere outside of the bundle, but it should contain no more than 3 planets, and they should be very close to each other, within 6 degrees or within 8 degrees, because it's not so much a chunk as it is a focus point. That focus point can be in aspect to either of the edge planets or to the heart of an area, and it's stronger if it is. If it's centralized in the open area that isn't part of the area gestalt, that's even better. The focal point is all important, and it can have, I've found, at least 4 different kinds of ways that it can function. Number 1, it can function as a fulcrum, or as a pivot, or as a handle. Number 2, it can act as a guide, or a lodestar, or a reference point. Number 3, it can act as a spark plug or a touchstone, something that gets things going. Rarely, it can act as an anchor or as a stabilizer. Usually the hybrids are much too dynamic for an anchor. Yeah. First was a fulcrum, pivot or handle. Second was a guide. Third was a touchstone or a spark plug. And fourth was an anchor or a stabilizer. Yes? No. We're only using planets. Yeah. Because otherwise it gets, the whole idea is lost in it. What, the fulcrum? Yeah. Fulcrum. No, we're going to come to that. We're going to look at some of them now. All right. The bucket. In our charts, we actually have one bucket. A bucket is a bundle with an outside focus. So it's like a concentrated slug with one concentrated point outside. So this gives it utility. It's got this thing that it wants to do, and it's got this one outside point that allows it to do it. Whereas if it stayed concentrated just in the bundle, it would be myopic. But you take a bundle and you give it a handle, it becomes very powerful. The whole idea is mechanical advantage, tremendous mechanical advantage. And the bucket is great for accomplishment of great works. It's like a sledgehammer, or it's like a sling. It's like a pan. You throw a whole pan of water. The difficulty lies with the fulcrum. with the pivot point. Because very often there's a lot of stress that is placed on that planet or planets, and it's hard to keep that together. Since all planets are people, the people that represent the pivot are very important people in life. It's like your contact with the outside world, or the people who spark things to get things going. Potential positives, utility, momentum, force, practicality, direction. Potential negatives, too strong. Sometimes people who have buckets have a hard time keeping it together in life. It's hard to stop or reverse. Sometimes it's excessively assertive. The next one is sailboat, umbrella, bow and arrow. All the same thing. What it is a bow with an outside point. Preferably the outside point is opposite the heart of the bow. So this has the rocking thoroughness that a bow has, but it has an external reference. It's like a sailboat. You know, it's a sailboat, everything is spread out like that, but it would just sit there and rock with the waves. But you give it a sail, you give it a rudder, one outside point, and then all of that rocking motion is given direction. Or it's like controlled protection. If you try to take a disc and cover yourself from the sun or from the rain, it gets to be a little dicey matter. But if you can hold an umbrella with one hand, and you're covering all of that area, and it's controlled protection. This is like when you have what they use this in astronomy, like they make those great big radio telescopes. They're like balls, and then they've got one receptor that all of the light or all of the sound or all of the X-rays are focused to one point, and then that one point is the reference point, and everything from a large area of space gets focused right down. Excellent principle. See, it's like gathering from over a large area and centralizing. If you think about it, that's what a bow and arrow is. All of the energy over the whole bow gets centered on just the arrow. And so that what it takes to bend all along the bow gets directed so that it projects in that way. So it's, again, energy gathering or information gathering. And it's not just humming over the same thing like the bow is humming over the same thing. It has that outside reference point to make it clear. Not more than 6 or 8 degrees. So it has the same strengths and liabilities that you find with the bucket are found in a broader way with the umbrella. Now the other hybrids are weakened. They could be called 2-point hybrids. One's the slingshot. And the slingshot is a bundle with 2 outside points. That's the way a slingshot works. It's when you have 2 outside points, you have a modular control. And you can center between 2 things, whereas if you try to make a one-stick slingshot, the stick gets in the way. See what I'm trying to say? But when it's modulated between the Y of, here's your bundle, it can pass right through there, and you have the accuracy of the center point, the center between the two exterior points. However, because the 2 points outside spread things out, it makes the effect weaker. If you have a simple sling where you just have, just a ball, a lead ball on a rope, you have much more power. But if you have to sling it between the Y, that's right. You don't have the accuracy of a slingshot, but you have more power. Yeah, and the concentration is there. So the 2 points weaken things, but they still provide a reasonable force, but there's something lost. And the last one I don't think is worth spending a lot of time on. It's the antenna, which is a bowl with 2 external points. Like next 2 external points are modulators. I never thought about that. I'll have to think about that. I don't know whether there's something to that or not, but obviously, if you take like 2 eyes, the wider perception, you have depth. Whereas if you have 1 eye, you have the depth, and you can only approximate it. I was sitting. This was back in the old beatnik days. And a bunch of us were sitting around an apartment before the triangle was ripped down. It was old storefronts and poor people that lived there. And the beatniks and the folkniks hung out in those storefronts. And there was a party there, and it was one of those late night parties and pot and everything going on. And there was a painting on the wall. And this strange guy from Milwaukee comes in, and he hangs out with the bohemian crowd from Milwaukee. And he walks in, and he said, "A one-eyed painter painted that." And everybody's mouth just fell open. And they said to him, "Well, why did you know that? How did you know that a one-eyed painter had painted that?" He says, "Close your eye and look at it. It has more depth with 1 eye than with 2, because the effect of getting depth with 1 eye, you have to cheat in order to do it. And when you look at it with 2 eyes, the depth effect isn't there, and it just looks like a strange perspective." So that's something like that modulating between 2 points of view. Everybody played those games when you were kids where you look through your hand. You look with this eye and you could see something, and you look with this eye and you'd see your hand, but when you looked at both, you were looking through your hand. You got that X-ray effect. All right, but that's what the antenna is like. It's a modulation of a broadcast, or a modulation of a broad reception. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this because this is, the Gestalt is the mildest of all things. Now, what I have done is, in the dead of night, last night about 2 a.m, I made a synopsis of everything we've just covered without all of the pointings at tools that use them, but everybody can get a synopsis. And then the other thing is an assignment. And what the assignment is going to be is that you're going to go down to Kinko's and you're going to make 16 copies, which we're going to work with for all the rest of the year, and you're going to fill out the Gestalt. In most cases, you're going to run into nondescript charts. I know for sure that there's 1 bowl, and I know for sure that there's 1 bucket. I haven't looked at all the charts, and so just put a little conspectus. And then, if you want to, make some commentary notes on another sheet of paper, and then I'll make commentary notes for all 16 of them, and then we'll share as we go on. One of those sheets for each chart, yeah. And then we're going to start with the profile index now. No, that's all the rest of the year, at least. Yeah, a conspectus is a short little one-line statement, like when you make a conspectus is a shortened version of something that's a long journey. And the long journey of everything that you're going to say about Helen Keller's bowl will be on different pages. They'll be on a different sideline page. This is just a quickie. This is just a quickie that when you pick up the chart, you look and say zip zip. Yeah. And then, but you've got the references to the notes that for later on. Because we're going to end up with a thick file. This is going to end up probably being a 500-page book when it's done. What? Oh, there's something right down there. Oh. Yeah. I can't speak for the quality of the synopsis because the synopsis I was very, very tired. If I were married, I would at 3 a.m. I would be making something other than synopses. Who said anything about marriage? Full-time, part-time sounds nice. Yeah. So next time we're going to be looking at samples, and then you can offer what you have to say, because each of you may have insights. I'm sure that at least 3 of you have read 1 or 2 biographies of these people by now, and so I'm going to give samples, but everybody's going to want to participate. Paul hasn't come back yet, but he'll be back for the next class. He won't be here for Shakespeare next week, but he'll be back. He says he's all eager to dig back in, and he'll have something to offer, and Bob will have a few things to offer. Oh, yes. The University Theater, for the next several weekends, is playing The Tempest, which is the play that we're talking about in the Mysticism and Shakespeare class. The Mitchell Theater. That's... Well, yeah, no, there are actually 3 theaters in there. Yeah. If you come across that little open plaza between Pisons, if you come right across the middle of that, there are some glass doors, and right there is where the Mitchell Theater is. Yes. There's actually a littler theater in there. Oh, yeah? Prospero's probably going to be on drugs or something like that. Oh, yeah. That I don't mind, thanks. Fun. Now, Heidi, I don't want you to have too long of a presentation next time. If you have questions about these things, next time we'll go through questions. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Good.
I have a question now.
Okay.
You're talking about the bundles.
Yes.
And you said that you feel that they should have be within
60
degrees.
That doesn't happen very often, yeah.
No. So when I look at that, it's like there's very few times, because of the outer planets, there's very few times in history that can happen.
Yes.
And there's very few places on Earth that can happen.
No, it could happen. If it happens one place, it happens every place on Earth.
Oh, is that right? Because I was looking at I suppose that's
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
That's true. I guess it's just the way the chart looks.
Yeah, but there are some people that wait until those special times in history to be born.
Well, it looks like in the 20th century we had maybe 1 or 2, is that correct? But if we go back 1,000, 2,000
Yeah, I haven't run the program on it yet, and I don't know anybody that has, but that's something I plan to do, is run a program to see how often bundles occur, how many.
Well, I just kind of went through,
Yeah.
that's 500, and, the outer planets start to light as you go back forward in time. So
Yeah.
we're really in one of the only times in history that can even possibly
There was one in the 60s.
Well, yeah, this
Yep.
last.
Yes, it's going to be a long time before it happens again.
So
Exactly.
what does that say about our time? Does that say something about us?
Yes.
People today?
Yes. It says the beginning and end of a cycle. Usually when there's a bundle, it's the beginning and end of a cycle. The bundle is both. It's like a conjunction. The first part of the conjunction, when it's applying, is the end of the cycle. The second part of the conjunction, when it's separating, is the beginning of the new cycle. In a circle, the beginning and end is the same point.
So how would that manifest itself in society today?
I think you need those specially concentrated people when you start something new. That you need to have people that are myopic, you can see that only that one thing, and they're the ones that are strong enough and concentrated enough to bring it about. But what we had, like in a year and a half ago, was actually a bucket because of because of Pluto's outside position. That was a really strong utile thing. And if you want to have one planet out there on the handle of a bucket, you want it to be Pluto, because that's a really strong, powerful will planet, and that's a really good focus. Yes. The most common? I don't know. I don't have numbers on it. I'm sorry. All of my life I wanted to have these numbers, and now the computers are available, and I'm just not getting to it. And all the astrologers out there, nobody has worked out a probabilistic chart, how often such and such aspect forms, and what are the probabilities, how many out of 1,000 will have this aspect. And so that if you run a statistical study on something, and you say, this factor seems to be associated with this illness because so and so many people have it. Well, maybe so and so many people have, out of all people have that, and there are no tables. I don't know of anywhere where there is a table of probabilities. So I want to work on one, and I want to do all kinds of things in it, though. Like I want to have the geometric figures, like between superior conjunctions of Mercury. The superior conjunctions of Mercury form a sextile on the zodiac, whereas the superior conjunctions of Venus form a pentagon, so that when one occurs, the next one will be either 72 or 144 degrees away, plus or minus. And like the conjunctions of Pluto and Uranus,